Hello, everybody. Welcome to Deeksha Online. So, in today's lecture, we will be focusing on a new chapter. The name of the chapter is called Reproduction in Organisms. So, what do we look forward to in this chapter? So, to give you a chapter overview or a roadmap of this chapter, we will be discussing about the following aspects in this particular chapter. Our main focus will be regarding the basic aspects of reproduction. So, first we will learn about the process of asexual reproduction. What is the meaning of asexual reproduction? What are the different types of asexual reproduction? Okay. Then we will move on to sexual reproduction. And how is sexual reproduction different from asexual reproduction? And what makes sexual reproduction more unique? And is it advantageous? And how did organisms adapt to the same? And with regard to the sexual reproduction, the further discussions or the further topics in this particular chapter would be how an organism prepares itself for sexual reproduction, which is the pre-fertilization events. So pre-fertilization events, we have the formation of gametes, which is referred to as the gametogenesis, and then the transfer of gametes. The transfer of gametes is required because the sperm and the egg have to come together, isn't it? And finally, when they come together, there is fusion of the sperm and the egg. And this fusion of the sperm and the egg is referred to as fertilization. So after fertilization, we have the post-fertilization events. Now in post-fertilization events, you know the product of fertilization, which is the zygote. And once the zygote is formed, we have already learned in the previous chapter that the zygote starts dividing, it starts multiplying, and it develops into a multicellular structure called the embryo. And this process where the embryo is formed is referred to as embryogenesis. Okay, so these are the highlights of some of the things that we will be discussing in this entire chapter of reproduction in organisms. To start off with, let us begin with understanding a very simple term which is referred to as the lifespan. So, how long we live is referred to as the lifespan, and the definition of lifespan is it is the period, the time period from when we take birth to the natural death of an organism. So, they may ask this as a 1 mark question. So, it is a 1 mark definition question. The lifespan is defined as the period from the time of birth to the natural death of an organism. Okay, now it is very important to remember that lifespan does not necessarily correlate with the sizes of the organism. It doesn't matter whether the organism is a huge organism or it is a tiny organism. Okay, so irrespective of the sizes of the organism, the lifespan has been determined, and there are a lot of factors that play a role in determining the lifespan of an organism. Generally, we say it is the genetic constitution and how well the organism has adapted to its surroundings, etc. Whatever be the lifespan, death is a certainty. So, this is something that we all are aware of, that ultimately an organism grows old and ultimately it has to die. So, whatever be the lifespan, death is a certainty, except in case of single celled forms. Now, why do we call these single celled forms as immortal? Now, one thing that you should remember here is, let us say, imagine that there is a cell. Okay, now this cell divides into two daughter cells. Correct? Now, when this cell, this is the mother cell that divides into two daughter cells, it is as if the two daughter cells are the renewed or the rejuvenated copies of the mother. Okay, so it is as if the mother cell is still living. Where is it living? It is living through its daughter cells because the mother cell has divided into two daughter cells. So we can say that the daughter cells are the renewed or the rejuvenated copies of the mother cell, or the mother cell is living through her daughters, and therefore we can say that such cells which divide, which are single celled and which divide into daughter cells, can be considered as immortal. Of course, they do have accidental death in case that, for example, if this living cell is living in a pond and there's no water in the pond and the pond dries up, then obviously it's going to die. Or say it's infected by a bacteria or a virus, then obviously it's going to die. But it does not have a natural death. Because it is constantly dividing into its daughter cells, it is living through its daughter cells. Okay? There should be a process. It is important to note that there should be a process to ensure continuity of life forms. Now, today, when we look back, we have so many new species and life forms of plants and animals on this planet. And in evolution, you will learn that how they came to exist, how they came to be through a gradual process of change. So, there should be a process which makes sure that organisms continue to remain or continue to stay on this planet. What is that process? Yes, you're right. This process is referred to as reproduction. And this process of reproduction ensures continuity of life forms or continuity of species. Clear to all of you? Now moving on to what is the meaning of reproduction. Now again, this is a very important 1 mark definition question in your PU exam. Reproduction can be defined as a biological process in which an organism gives rise to young ones similar to itself. So when an organism reproduces, it produces a group of organisms called offspring. And always remember, the offsprings are similar to the parent. Obviously, because they share the genetic material of the parent, isn't it? And as a result, the offsprings are similar to the parent. So remember, it is a process which gives rise to, which where an organism gives rise to young ones which are similar to itself. How exactly does reproduction take place in living organisms? There are two modes of reproduction. There are two major types of reproduction. One is referred to as asexual reproduction and one is referred to as sexual reproduction. So we will first focus on asexual reproduction in this chapter. What is asexual reproduction? A very important question again. All these are important definition question, or these are all 1 mark questions. And please be thorough with the 1 mark questions. I've always been telling you that it is very easy to lose out on these 1 mark questions because there is no choice. And you have to be very concise and very precise in your answers. There's no beating around the bush. Okay? So what is asexual reproduction? It is a process in which an offspring is produced by a single parent. Very important. Uniparental. So one of the salient features of asexual reproduction is a single parent is producing offsprings with or without the involvement of gamete formation. So gamete formation may be there or it may not be there. But the criteria is a single parent is producing offsprings. Do you understand what I'm saying here? So in asexual reproduction, there is participation of only a single parent, and either there may be gamete formation or there may not be any gamete formation. Now you can imagine if there is a single parent and a single parent is producing offsprings, then all the offsprings which are produced by the parent will be exactly identical to the parent and to themselves. So what do we call such a group of organisms or group of individuals which are very, very similar or identical, which are copies of each other? We call them as clones. Again, a very important a very important definition question. How do you define a clone? A clone is a term used to describe morphologically, meaning they appearance. Morphology is external features. So it is used to describe morphologically and genetically similar individuals or offsprings. I would say we'd rather use a word called identical here. They are identical. They are alike. How are they alike? Not only in their appearance but also in their genetic material. This is because they are all derived from a single parent, the same organism, the same mother organism. So, all the offsprings that are born to the same mother, because the mother alone, I'm just using the word mother here, okay? So, because the organism is alone involved in reproduction, all the organisms are identical to each other and they are identical to the mother, the parent organism. Isn't it? So the term clone is used to describe morphologically and genetically identical individuals or offsprings born to a single parent. And whenever a single parent is involved, what type of reproduction is it? It is asexual reproduction. Remember, it is uniparental and it may or may not involve gamete formation. Okay. What are the different modes of asexual reproduction? Now, this gives you a list of the different modes because they may ask you the mode and they may ask you to give you the example. Now, see the different types or modes or structures or processes of asexual reproduction. We have binary fission in bacteria and protists like amoeba and paramecium. We have simple cell division. When I say cell division, it may involve mitosis, where one cell divides into two daughter cells, and this is seen in desmids, which is a protozoan, which is a protistan. It is not a protozoan, it is a protistan, and these are called desmids. Okay, then we have multiple fission. In case of amoeba, you will know how binary fission and multiple fission are different from each other as we proceed through the slides. Budding in case of hydra and yeast. Formation of structures called zoospores in algae and fungi. Formation of structures called conidia. Now these are all from 5 onwards. Basically it is the formation of special asexual structures. Asexual structures like zoospores in algae and fungi. Asexual structures like conidia in penicillium, which is a fungus. Gemmules in sponges, which belong to phylum Porifera. And there is a process called fragmentation that happens in hydra. So 8 different modes of asexual reproduction we have lined up now. Let us go one by one and let us see how asexual reproduction happens and how varied these 8 different processes or 8 different methods or modes of asexual reproduction are. Okay? The first one is binary fission. How do you define binary fission? All these are definition questions. Again, a 1-mark question. Okay, a cell divides into 2 halves and each half rapidly grows into an adult. So the simplest form of binary fission, the most primitive form of binary fission, is seen in Monera, kingdom Monera, which includes bacteria. And remember, bacteria are prokaryotic. They don't have a distinct nucleus, they don't have membrane bound cell organelles. You know what a prokaryote is. So see the picture here, you will understand. Now this is the mother cell. And the mother cell has its own genetic material. DNA, double-stranded DNA. And just before the mother cell splits into 2, the DNA gets copied. See, there are 2 copies of DNA that are formed. This is called duplication of the DNA. And then you see how the mother cell is splitting into 2 halves. isn't it? So it divides into two halves, and then ultimately we have one daughter cell over here and one daughter cell on the right side. And both of them have received their copies, their respective copies of genetic material. So this process where a mother cell splits into two halves, and each of these halves grow rapidly into adult cells, which are themselves again capable of binary fission, which are themselves capable of asexual reproduction, is referred to as binary fission. Binary means two, fission means splitting. So a cell is splitting into two. Is that clear to all of you? So this example has been given to you keeping in mind the most primitive form of binary fission which is seen in bacteria. Like I said, bacteria belongs to kingdom Monera. Okay? Where else would we see binary fission? There is another example for binary fission, which is in the case of unicellular eukaryotes. Now, unicellular eukaryotes like amoeba are protozoa that are put under kingdom Protista. So, even in amoeba, which is the most famous unicellular eukaryote, the earliest eukaryote belonging to division protozoa, kingdom Protista, isn't it? And see how the amoeba is dividing into two daughter cells. Now, this is the mother amoeba, the parent amoeba, and see how it's elongating, and the nucleus is also splitting into two, it is dividing into two. Actually, the nucleus becomes dumbbell shaped like this because the nucleus develops a constriction in between and the chromosomes get divided. And you can see how the cell membrane also develops a constriction. See, nucleus also develops. Now what is the shaded part here? This is the nucleus. The nucleus is also developing a constriction. The cell membrane is also developing a constriction. And see how the constriction deepens. Ultimately, the constriction deepens to a point that it splits it into two daughter cells, and the nucleus also splits into two. And so we have with us 1 and 2. Two daughter amoebae. We started off with a parent amoeba and we end up with two daughter amoebae. Clear? So this process where one mother cell splits into two daughter cells, which divides into two, and each of them rapidly grow into adults, is referred to as binary fission. And something very important to note here is, now if this is the amoeba, surprisingly, now if this is the nucleus of the amoeba, inside the nucleus, chromosomes start appearing. That means amoeba also has chromosomes of its own. Okay, and surprisingly, like in case of mitosis, I think from your last year basics you all know that during mitosis the nuclear membrane has to disappear. But surprisingly here, without the nuclear membrane disappearing, the nuclear membrane is very much intact. And even without the nuclear membrane disappearing, the spindle apparatus is formed inside. And all the chromosomes align at the equator and they get segregated here. Amoeba has about 600 to 700 chromosomes in its nucleus. So what you need to remember here is during the division of the nucleus, which we call as karyokinesis, there is no disappearance of nuclear membrane. The chromosomes remain within the nucleus and even the spindle apparatus is formed within the nucleus. We call this type of cell division, we don't call it as mitosis, we call it as amitosis or direct cell division. We also call amitosis as closed mitosis. Why do we call it as closed mitosis? Because the chromosomes are dividing inside the nucleus. The nuclear membrane is not disappearing. So that's how when the chromosomes get segregated within the nucleus, gradually the nucleus will develop a constriction in the center. See? Can you see? It's become constricted, and ultimately the cell also will become constricted from the outside. And this constricted nucleus is what I described here, or what you see here in this particular picture. It's becoming dumbbell shaped. So remember what is actually happening inside the nucleus. Chromosomal division is happening. Chromosomal segregation is happening. And for chromosomal segregation, for chromosomal division to happen, what should be set up inside the nucleus? Spindle apparatus must be set up. Centrioles must be there. Surprising that all this is happening locked inside the nucleus. And that's why it's called amitosis or closed mitosis. Did you understand how it divides? So this is how binary fission is different in amoeba compared to bacteria, because amoeba has a eukaryotic organization. But the ultimate goal of binary fission is it starts off like this, and the ultimate goal is it develops into two daughter cells. It divides into two daughter cells. Each of them will rapidly grow into adults. Clear how binary fission takes place in amoeba? All right. Okay, I'm sorry, the slide disappeared again. Okay, the next type of asexual reproduction is by cell division. Cell division happens by simple mitosis, the type of mitosis that you all have learned. A cell, a mother cell or a parent cell, divides into two daughter cells by simple mitosis. So these green structures, these unicellular structures that you can see in the picture, they are desmids, and they belong to kingdom Protista. They are called specifically golden algae. I think you must have learnt in your first year, chrysophyta, isn't it? So in desmids, the mode of asexual reproduction is by cell division. The third one, which is called multiple fission, again we come back to amoeba. Why is it called multiple fission? Until now we saw there was one parent which divided into two daughter cells. One split into two. That's why it was called binary fission. And that is what happens in cell division also. In mitosis also, you have one cell splitting into two. Yes or no? But here what happens is a parent cell divides into many daughter cells, not just one, many daughter cells. So we have one parent cell. It is dividing. How it divides we shall see now. Into many daughter cells. So not just two daughter cells, but many daughter cells. That's why it is referred to as multiple fission. The best example for multiple fission is amoeba again. In amoeba, there are two phenomena that are observed. One is called encystation and one is called sporulation. So let us see what happens. And it is said that this happens mostly during unfavorable condition. To tide over unfavorable conditions, amoeba divides by encystation and sporulation. So what has happened here? Let us look at the image. There is an amoeba which is happily living here. Now suddenly what happens is it develops a wall, a three-layered wall around itself. That means suddenly the condition has become unfavorable. All this while amoeba was living very happily. because the conditions around it were very favorable for it. But now what happens is it withdraws. You know that amoeba has these tiny finger-like projections. What are these finger-like projections? These are called pseudopodia. Yes or no? So during multiple fission, what happens is this amoeba will withdraw all its pseudopodia and it becomes roughly spherical. See how it's become rounded. And it develops a thick wall with 3 layers on it. This is called the cyst wall. See here it's mentioned cyst wall. So first it withdrew all its pseudopodia and then it develops a thick protective covering around it. And this thick protective covering is how many layered? 3 layered. And this process is called encystation. What does it do once it is encysted? Notice that when it undergoes encystation, it has only one nucleus. But now it has so many after encystation. It remains as it is after encystation, but on the return of favorable conditions. See how the nucleus is dividing into so many nuclei. All these dots I am highlighting here, they are all daughter nuclei. One single nucleus, which was there here when it underwent encystation, has given rise to, has divided into multiple daughter nuclei. That's why it is called multiple fission. Isn't it? Now gradually each of these nuclei, so let me draw this diagram here, only the cell without the cyst wall, let me show here. So this is the cell, 3-layered cyst wall is over here. Okay, now let me show very few nuclei for diagrammatic purposes. So many nuclei have been formed. And now what happens is each nucleus gets enveloped by cytoplasm of its own. See? Cytoplasm comes and gets collected around each nucleus. And the cytoplasmic covering also develops a plasma membrane around itself. That means it is taking shape into a cell. Isn't it? These are the daughter cells. Not only does cytoplasm come and ensheath them or encapsulate them, but even a membrane is formed around these daughter nuclei. And then, when the conditions are favorable, see how the cyst wall is rupturing. Isn't it? The cyst wall will break. And what do we call these daughter cells that are formed? They are called pseudopodiospores. And when the cyst wall breaks, these daughter cells are set free. They come out of the amoeba, of the parent. Now the parent is no longer existent. It's living through the daughters now. Now each of these cells grow to become adult amoebae. Do you understand what's happening here? See how the young amoeba, once these pseudopodiospores have come out, they develop pseudopodia and they become young amoebae, as you can see here. So one parent amoeba has given rise to hundreds of daughter cells, hundreds of young amoebae. And that's why this process is called multiple fission. When does this process happen? This process happens during unfavorable condition. What is the first step? The first step is where the pseudopodia of the amoeba are withdrawn. It gets rounded off and it develops a 3-layered thick cyst wall. And then this cell is now in a period of rest. And then when there is return of favorable condition, the nucleus divides by multiple fission to produce multiple daughter nuclei. Each of the daughter nuclei get enveloped by cytoplasm and develop a membrane around themselves. And they emerge when the cyst wall breaks. What do these daughter cells emerge as? Pseudopodiospores. And what do they develop into? They develop into young amoebae. Clear? So and this process where a single cell is producing these pseudopodiospores. See, these spores are formed, right? The pseudopodiospores which come out, which develop into young amoebae. This process is referred to as sporulation. As per the NCERT, we have to use two technical terms here. One is called encystation and one is called sporulation. The process where the nucleus divides into daughter nuclei. Each of the daughter nucleus gets enveloped by cytoplasm, forms a pseudopodiospore, emerges by the breaking of the cyst wall, and develops into young amoebae is referred to as sporulation. Clear to all of you? Okay. Then the next process, the next type of asexual reproduction is called budding. So what happens in budding? See here, this is a cell, a yeast cell we have taken for example here. A small protrusion or a projection develops on the mother cell, and see, this is the nucleus. Can you see again the nucleus is becoming dumbbell shaped here? That means the nucleus, which was a simple spherical structure like this, it is dividing into two daughter nuclei by developing a constriction in between like this. This was the parent nucleus, and now that nucleus is dividing into two, and can you see one of them is entering into this projection, is passed on into this projection or this protrusion, and gradually this cytoplasm also gets distributed, and this projection gets separated from the parent cell and it starts leading an independent life and it matures into a new organism. This process is called budding. Why is it called unequal division here? Did you see the bud has a smaller size when compared to the parent cell? Yes or no? The bud is smaller when compared to the parent cell, and that's why it is called unequal. Initially, the small buds remain attached to the parent cell, but then gradually they get separated and they mature into a new organism. Like I said, cytoplasm also is dividing, but before that, what should divide? This is the parent nucleus. And see how the parent nucleus divides into ultimately. What happens to this constriction? Ultimately, we have two nuclei with us. And what do we call them? The daughter nuclei. And what else should divide? The cytoplasm also should divide. Some amount of cytoplasm enters the bud. And finally, the bud gets separated, and now it has become a cell of its own. And it matures into an adult organism, the adult yeast. Did you understand? So here also it is said that the nucleus does not disappear, but without the disappearance of the nucleus, what is getting segregated inside? Chromosomes. So once again, what is this process where a nucleus divides without the nuclear membrane disappearing? We call it as amitosis. I had told you when I discussed binary fission in amoeba. Amitosis or direct cell division or closed mitosis. The best example for budding is yeast. Okay? Budding is also seen in hydra. How is it different from yeast? Here the bud that is formed is a multicellular structure. Because hydra is multicellular, it belongs to phylum Coelenterata. A small protrusion develops on the parent body and gradually it takes shape of a young organism. It develops all the bodily features, and then see how huge the bud has become. Ultimately, the bud gets severed off, cut off from the parent, and it starts leading an independent existence. It grows into an adult, which is again capable of reproduction. So this is the type of budding that we see in multicellular organisms, such as hydra. Hydra belongs to phylum Coelenterata. Now coming to asexual structures, zoospores. These are special kind of structures, special kind of cells which have flagellae on them, which are motile. Because they have flagella, they are motile, and they are produced by a special structure called zoosporangia. Now this is a cell. See this cell here. This cell is called a zoosporangia because it is producing these cells, these zoospores. The cytoplasm inside the cell undergoes cleavage. The nucleus also undergoes division. See, these are the nuclei. The nuclei get surrounded by cytoplasm and they get surrounded by membrane, new membrane. And then see how it is rupturing here. It's opening up and these daughter cells are coming out. See how each daughter cell has a plasma membrane, cytoplasm inside, nucleus inside, and it has two flagella. And such daughter cells are called zoospores. What do? Once they are set free, they grow into adults. They lead an independent life. Isn't it? So remember, the parent cell, this is also a cell only, but it looks massive because it's filled with zoospores inside. This parent cell is referred to as the zoosporangia. Isn't it? Now sporangia, sporan means spore, zoospore. Angios means vessel. It is a vessel which has what inside it? Spores inside it. Isn't it? How did it produce these spores? By cell division. Whatever cytoplasm it had, whatever nucleus it had, it underwent division to form these tiny daughters, which are motile and flagellated, which are called what? Zoospores. And they're green in color because here they have given the example of algae, but that doesn't mean that it is found only in algae. It is also found in fungi. The only difference is in fungi the spores are kidney shaped and their flagella are sideways attached. Here the flagella are apically attached and they're like teardrops. Isn't it? The spores are like teardrops and they have apically inserted flagella here. But here they are reniform, kidney shaped spores. And see how they have lateral insertion of flagella, not apical insertion. This is the difference. The zoospores of algae are pear shaped. The zoospores of fungi are reniform. Okay? Conidia. Conidia are again asexual structures. You can see how there are chains of these spherical, see, these spherical, very thin walled structures. Chains and chains of them are produced. They don't have flagella, they are non-motile, they are thin walled, and they are produced on these erect structures which are called conidiophore. See, these structures are called conidiophore, these erect structures. They are born on them and they are produced exogenously on the outside. Isn't it? They divide, they undergo splitting from the outside. And this is why they are called exogenous spores. They are thin, non-motile spores. And what happens to them? And each one, they get separated. And each one will germinate into a new fungus. This is seen in fungi alone. It is a unique feature of fungi. Did you understand? Once these chains of conidia are formed, like I've shown here, they disperse. And once they disperse, once they fall on a suitable substratum, they start giving out mycelium. They start giving out the tube-like structures which make up the fungal body, which is called hypha. And they organize into a new fungus. Example is penicillium. Gemmules. Now gemmules are also called internal buds. Why are they called internal buds? Because they are produced inside the body, not on the surface like hydra what we saw. They are also buds only. Gemmules also come under buds, budding. But the buds are not produced on the surface like how we saw in hydra. A small protrusion develops on the surface. It is not like that. It is produced internally by sponges. Which phylum do sponges belong to? Yes, Porifera. And these buds, internal buds, are mostly produced during unfavorable conditions. Say, for example, it is mostly seen in freshwater sponges. The best example is Spongilla. Say, for example, this sponge is living in a pond and that pond dries up during the summer, intense heat, intense sun. It has nowhere to go. It knows it's going to die. So what it does is it constructs a gemmule inside its body and then dies. See the gemmule. It has a very thick wall with lot of these skeletal structures, needle-like structures called spicules, which make sure that they don't get dehydrated. Isn't it? And then inside the gemmule, you have these cells. These cells are capable of, let us first call them a name, give them a name, archaeocytes. And these cells are said to be totipotent. Totipotent means each cell can give rise to an entire sponge. One single cell can give rise to one single organism. And it has a mouth. See? This is called micropyle. It is initially sealed off. Later it opens on the return of favorable conditions. And all these archaeocytes will come out. Say for example, the rainy season is back again and the pond is filled with water. The sponge dies, but the gemmule doesn't die. The cells inside the gemmule remain as it is. And then when there is rain, these cells come together. They come out. And each one of them develops into a sponge which grows and becomes an adult. Did you understand? Why are they called internal buds? Yes, they are not produced on the surface of the sponge body, but they develop on the inside. And when are they produced? When the pond dries up. When the pond dries up, the sponge knows it's going to die. So before that, it produces a gemmule or an internal bud and then dies off. How is the gemmule protected? By spicules. And what are the clusters of cells inside called? Archaeocytes. On the return of favorable condition, the micropyle opens and these archaeocytes come out, and each archaeocyte, which is totipotent, develops into an adult sponge. Alright? Fragmentation, as the name itself indicates, the body of an organism splits into individual fragments. It may be by accident, it may be voluntarily, and each piece or fragment that is broken apart from the parent grows into an adult. This is seen in hydra. See, this is the parent hydra. See how it is broken into how many fragments here? 1, 2, 3. And each of them develops into adults. It's a form of regeneration, isn't it? So the body breaks into individual pieces or breaks into fragments, and each fragment grows into an adult. This is called fragmentation. Now moving on to the next type of, it is a type of asexual reproduction, but it is, we can say, more advanced. It is called vegetative reproduction. It is seen only in plants. How is it different from whatever asexual reproduction that we have discussed until now? The only difference is here there are multicellular structures that are produced on the parent body. Production of multicellular structures. And then these multicellular structures can develop into new individuals. Suppose they get separated from the parent body, they can give rise to new individuals. And all of them are genetically identical to the parent. Why? Again, it is uniparental. A single parent takes part in reproduction. So all the offsprings are genetically similar, identical not only to themselves, but also to the parent. There is no mixing of genetic material from two parents here. Did you understand? So when there is formation of multicellular structures, we will see what kind of multicellular structures are involved in vegetative reproduction. So there is a plant, it produces some multicellular structure. It may be attached to the plant or it may get detached from the plant, but it can give rise to new individuals. Like for example, let me give you a very simple example. Take a potato. Imagine you have bought potato from the market and you have kept it in your house. You can see that after a few days, small buds start developing on the potato. So potato was a part of a plant before, and it is a multicellular structure. And now what is it giving rise to? New buds are forming, which are nothing but new individuals. And if you plant this potato, you will get a potato plant. So this is called vegetative reproduction. Okay? There are different units of vegetative reproduction like runner, rhizome, sucker, tuber, offset, and bulb. These are the structures, the multicellular structures that are produced by the parent body, the parent plant. And what do we call such units of vegetative reproduction? Such units of vegetative reproduction that are capable of giving rise to new offspring are referred to as vegetative propagules. What are they called? Vegetative propagules. 1 mark definition. Even the meaning of vegetative reproduction will be asked. And there are these multicellular units. Remember, all these units, like I told you in the previous slide, they are all multicellular units which are capable of giving rise to new plants, new offsprings. Okay? So let us look into one by one the different vegetative propagules here. The first one is runner. So this is the parent plant. This is the grass. Now see, there are at the base of this crown or this aerial shoot, you can see a horizontal branch that is coming out. And the horizontal branch, it travels on the surface of the ground horizontally, and you can see regularly it is developing roots also. And how after traveling a certain distance, it has given rise to a new crown or a new aerial shoot, a daughter plant. Now these runners, these horizontal branches are green, they are thin, and like I said, they grow on the ground. Because they grow on the ground, they are called subaerial stems. They are actually stems only, but they don't grow upright, nor do they grow underground. They grow on the surface of the ground horizontally. That's why they are called subaerial. Okay, so they emerge from the base of the aerial shoot. Now this you can consider as the parent body, the parent shoot. They emerge from the base, they travel horizontally, at regular intervals they give rise to upright crown or upright aerial shoot, isn't it? So this is runner in grass. Rhizome of ginger and banana. See, you all are familiar with this rhizome that we use in cooking ginger. Actually, if you take this ginger and if you sow it in the soil, you will get new plants because it has nodes, and from the nodes, buds can develop. See, here at the ends, you can see these buds. And see, there are roots on the undersurface. These are called adventitious roots. Roots that develop elsewhere on the plant body other than the apical meristem, that is, other than, say, the stem tip, or other than the axil of the leaf, or at the angle of the branches, or other than the root tip. They are called adventitious roots. Okay, so basically, we say that adventitious bud is a bud that develops anywhere other than the apical part of the stem, the apical part of the root, and the angle of the leaf. And this is called an adventitious root because you tell me, where does a root develop from? A true root develops from where? Yes, from the seed, the radical of the seed. But here it is developing on a stem. That's why it is called adventitious root. So this is how the underground stem, which is referred to as rhizome of ginger, looks like. Sucker of chrysanthemum. Now again, this is the main stem or the parent stem. Now see how underground, this is a underground modification of the stem. From underground, a branch is arising. This branch, it grows horizontally, and then after a while it turns obliquely upwards, and then it emerges from above the ground and gives rise to a new plant. Such an underground branch, which emerges from the base of the main stem, which grows horizontally and then turns upwards, is referred to as a sucker. So see how from the main plant we have a daughter plant because of this underground branch, and this underground branch is called a sucker. It is seen in mint and chrysanthemum. Tuber of potato, actually the potato that we buy is meant, the plant uses it to store food. It's called a tuber. And see, like I told you, if you put aside the potato for some time, you can see these eyes on the potato. See, these eyes are nothing but the buds which have the ability to grow into buds. See, the bud has started germinating here. So this is the example for tuber of potato. So if you take this vegetative propagule, which is tuber, and put it under the soil, you will get a potato plant. That's why it is called a vegetative propagule. It has eyes or buds which can germinate into new plants. See, here it is germinating into a young plant. Okay? Offset of Eichhornia. Eichhornia is a plant which grows as a blanket on the surface of water. You must have seen it growing on lakes. It is commonly called water hyacinth. It is called the terror of Bengal because it grows so extensively on the water bodies that it literally chokes the organisms, it literally chokes the lake to death. Why? Because when it covers the lake surface by forming a blanket, obviously it takes away all the nutrients in the lake, it cuts off the sunlight supply, it cuts off oxygen supply, and all the plants and animals living in the lake will die. Isn't it? So this is an offset. An offset, as you can see, is a green branch. It is just like the runner. It is emerging now. This is the parent. It is emerging from the base of the parental plant, and it travels a certain distance, and it has given rise to a daughter plant. Again, the daughter plant will give out from its base a new offshoot, which is the offset. Isn't it? So this is exclusively seen in aquatic plants. So it grows horizontally and it gives rise to parent plants. Bulb of onion. This is also something very familiar we use in our day-to-day life. Now, if you cut open the onion bulb, you can see the condensed white part at the base. This is the actual stem of the onion plant. This is called the disc. And then you can see buds appearing in the center and on the sides. Actually, these buds give rise to flowers. They give rise to a tube. You must have seen a hollow green tube which ends up in flowers like this. And the flower is nothing but a reproductive structure, isn't it? So these are produced on the onion plant. And if you again take this onion bulb and sow it in the soil, you will get a new onion plant. See how roots are emerging from the base of this condensed stem. And see how they are surrounded by these fleshy leaves. It's called a tunicated bulb. Tunica means layers, layers and layers of these fleshy leaves. So this is the bulb of onion. Bulbil of agave. Bulbil is actually a bud. A bud which develops on the flowering axis of the plant. Now if this is the flowering axis where flowers are supposed to form, and instead these buds develop here. And if this bud gets cut off, it can give rise to a new plant. So these buds which develop on, see how these buds look like. This is the textbook diagram. And this is how the bulbil actually looks like. These are the buds which develop on the flowering axis. In case of agave, the name of the plant is agave or agave, however you would like to pronounce it. Leaf buds. Surprisingly, buds, these are called adventitious buds because buds don't develop usually on the leaf. I told you in the previous slide. Like how we called it adventitious root, because root developing on the stem is something abnormal. Here bud developing on the leaf is abnormal, so we call it as adventitious buds. See how on the leaf margin you can see daughter plants, buds have developed and young plants are starting to take shape. And this happens in the margin of the leaf, and therefore these buds which emerge on the margin of the leaves, which develop into young plants, are called leaf buds. The best example is a plant called bryophyllum. Okay? So to summarize the differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction, single parent. Sexual reproduction is biparental, two parents of opposite sexes are involved. Or one parent. Why it's or one parent? Because sometimes there may be a single parent which is producing both the sperm as well as the egg. So what would we call such a parent which is producing both? We call them as bisexual. Isn't it? So it may be two different parents which are of the opposite sexes, or the same parent producing two different gametes, opposite gametes. Mostly in asexual reproduction, body cells are involved, somatic cells. But in sexual reproduction, special cells are reserved for sexual reproduction, which are present in the gonads, isn't it? We had learned spermatogenesis, oogenesis. We all talked about germinal cells time and again. So germ cells are involved. Asexual reproduction involves production of asexual spores. Sexual reproduction involves production and fusion of sex cells, which are called gametes. Asexual reproduction, since there is no mixing of genetic material and there is only one parent involved, all the offsprings are genetically similar to each other and to their parents. Remember, we called it as a clone. But in sexual reproduction, because there is mixing of genetic material from the male and the female parent, they are not genetically similar to the parents. Asexual reproduction happens mostly during favorable conditions, not a rule, but mostly because reproduction can happen faster. Sexual reproduction is very, very slow, and it helps the organism to better adapt to the changing environment. So mostly an organism resorts to sexual reproduction during unfavorable condition, because when the times get tough, the tough get going, isn't it? So basically, when the conditions are tough, if it undergoes sexual reproduction, there is mixing of genetic material, favorable characters come together, and the organism becomes more capable of dealing with the challenges in the surrounding environment. So, sexual reproduction is slower, asexual reproduction is faster. Okay. Now, moving on to sexual reproduction, as you are aware, it involves male and female gametes produced either by the same individual or different individual, and there is formation of zygote. Again, they will ask this as a 1 mark definition question. So basically you can remember that two parents, this is not a broad definition, it's not a universal definition, because you know that it is not always two parents, but please remember, generally there are two parents involved of opposite sexes, and it involves formation of gametes plus their fusion. So very important definition question. The type of reproduction which involves two parents of opposite sexes involving the formation of gametes and their fusion to form a diploid zygote, and the zygote is the one that develops into a new organism. Okay? What are the phases in the life of an organism with respect to sexual reproduction? Here we will be focusing mostly on plants. As soon as a plant comes out of the seed, does it reproduce? No. It has to go through different phases. The first phase is called juvenile or vegetative phase. Then it is called reproductive phase. Then it is called senescent phase. So for an organism to be able to reproduce, you know that a plant, once it emerges from the seed, it becomes a tiny plant. Then it grows for several years. It grows and becomes sexually mature, and this phase is called the juvenile or vegetative phase, which involves growth and maturity. And then finally the plant starts flowering. Now the flowering phase is a reproductive phase, because it is now ready to undergo sexual reproduction. And then ultimately any organism, be it a plant or an animal, it has to go through old age, and this is called senescent phase that terminates in death. Same thing applies to animals also. Now we go through childhood until we become sexually mature. That is called the juvenile phase. In animals it is called juvenile phase. In plants we use the word vegetative phase. Then when we become sexually mature, the adult reproductive life is called reproductive phase. And then our old age, we are in the senescent phase. So in sexual reproduction, we can classify the phases of life into three. That is juvenile, reproductive, and senescent. So like I said, in the juvenile phase, there is initial phase of growth and maturity, like when the plant emerges from the seed, becomes a sapling, becomes a young plant, spends a lot of time in growing in its size, isn't it? Then see how the tree has attained flowering. The plant starts flowering. That means the plant has become capable of reproduction. It is now in its reproductive phase. And then finally the tree dies down, because the old age is associated with the body slowing down. Metabolism slows down, and ultimately there is death. And where there is death, this phase of the life is called, which culminates in death. This phase of life which culminates in death is called the senescent phase. Some plants you can clearly distinguish between these phases. See, when you sow the rice plant, this phase where the rice plant or the wheat plant hasn't flowered yet and it's growing very lushly, it's called vegetative phase. And then you start seeing flowers, rice or wheat flowers. This is the reproductive phase. And then finally it's time to harvest them. See how the color has changed. That means the plants have died now. That is senescent phase. So this is clearly distinguishable in those plants which live only for a year, annual, or which live for 2 years, biennial. Isn't it? So plants living for a year and then they die, they are called annual plants. Plants which live for 2 years. 1 year they undergo vegetative phase. In the second year they undergo reproductive phase, and finally they die out. In such plants which live either for 1 year or for 2 years, you can clearly distinguish between these different phases of life. There are a few plants which exhibit unusual flowering phenomenon. See, a bamboo becomes sexually mature after 50 to 100 years, and very soon after that it dies. It flowers only once in its lifetime. I'm using the word it becomes sexually mature because you know that if a plant is flowering, that means it is in which phase of its life? Yes, reproductive phase. So a bamboo plant takes 50 to 100 years to become reproductively active, and then when it flowers, soon after that it dies. Once the flowers bloom, the plant's job is done, it dies. So this is an unusual flowering phenomenon. So it flowers only once in its lifetime. So we can call such plants which flower only once in their lifetime as monocarpic, because once they flower, they die after that. There is one more plant which flowers once in 12 years, and it covers the valley in blue shades. It grows in the valleys of Tamil Nadu, of Karnataka and Kerala. This plant is called Strobilanthes kuntiana. It is commonly called Neelakurinji, and it flowers once in 12 years. See, this is also an unusual flowering pattern, but it is a perennial plant. Perennial plant means it grows, it lives for years together. If it lives for 1 year, it is annual. If it lives for 2 years, it is biennial. But here it lives for many, many, many years. That's why it's a perennial plant. And unusual flowering because it flowers once in 12 years. The plant flowered during September October 2006, as it is mentioned in the NCRT, but now 12 years have passed, so probably it flowered again sometime between 2018 and 2019. Clear? So once in 12 years, Strobilanthes kuntiana. So that marks the end of this particular lecture. We will stop with the phases of life specifically with regard to plants. So what did we learn in today's class? We learned about the meaning of lifespan, the meaning of reproduction, the innumerable modes of asexual reproduction, asexual methods, asexual structures. Then we learnt about vegetative reproduction. In vegetative reproduction, we learnt the units of vegetative reproduction, multicellular units which are capable of giving rise to new plants. They are called vegetative propagules. Isn't it? Then we learnt the differences between sexual and asexual reproduction. We specifically learnt that sexual reproduction is biparental. There is involvement of parents, participation of parents of opposite sexes, formation of gamete, fusion of gametes, isn't it? Then we learnt the major phases, especially with reference to plants. That is vegetative phase, reproductive phase, and senescent phase. And we learnt about bamboo and Neelakurinji, which is the unusual flowering phenomenon in few plants. So what about the homework? So take down the homework, all of you. What is asexual reproduction? 1 mark. Definition of a clone? 1 mark. A note on multiple fission, where you must talk about encystation and sporulation in amoeba. Now this is a 5-mark question, a major question. Although it is not an essay question, it is purely a very, very specific question. We are asking you to name the organisms which exhibit the following asexual methods of reproduction. Example for zoospore, you must give example for an organism that exhibits conidia, gemmules, example for budding, example for an organism which exhibits fragmentation. Please stick to the examples given in your NCRT book. Okay? Then, what are vegetative propagules? Give examples, 3 mark. Name the 3 phases, 3 mark. Give an example for a plant that flowers once in 12 years, 1 mark. Define sexual reproduction, 1 mark. So this completes the very first lecture of the chapter Reproduction in Organism. So we shall meet again on Deeksha Online with the next lecture in the same chapter. So until then, all of you take care and have a great day. Thank you.